Right, and let's jump into this in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hi guys, and welcome to GeeK Talk, where we talk deep and geek about pianos, keyboards, synthesizers, and music production. And my special guest today is a very, very familiar face in the world of music technology. He needs no further introduction. He's also the founder of the Sonicstate YouTube channel and the editor. I'm very honored to have my special guest, Mr. Nick Batt. Nick, how are you, sir?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for that rather effusive introduction. It makes me feel important, and goodness knows we all need ego boosts in these times, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just saying to Nick when we started, how amazing your camera looks and your setup.
Well, this is quite new because what I used to have here was just a cheap, one of our first generation cameras, but this actually is a great find because it's a Sony and it has a little bit more. It's good for skin tone and depth of field and full size sensor and whatnot. It's not 4K or anything, but it just looks better. Good glass, I think they say.
And one of the first things you asked me, Nick, when you came on just before we started recording was you asked me, have we met before? And I think my answer to you was, I feel like I know you because I've been watching you for so many years on YouTube. And you said this does seem to be the thing where you not only meet so many people, but people will often think they know you because of YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, saying I think they know me sounds like I'm being confrontational about it. I mean, I've had the same thing because if anybody that you watch a lot or you hear their voice, and I guess to a much greater degree, TV celebrities and people with a much larger reach than us, people coming up feel that they know them because they've seen so much of them. And you get, even in a little niche, you get the same thing. The weirdest one I ever had was being recognized before we went to video. We used to do Sonic Talk as audio only, and I was in a lift in Frankfurt, and these two Portuguese guys said, "Are you, Nick?" And I said, "Yeah." They said they recognized my voice, that was really that's super niche.
Wow. Well, we're going to, as I say, Nick, what I love about what you do in your channel is Sonicstate was one of the very first YouTube channels that sort of delved in depth the way you do, before everyone sort of jumped onto the bandwagon. And Sonicstate has always been my sort of go-to YouTube channel. Whenever a new piece of gear comes onto the market, I obviously do my research, I read up about it, but I usually very often make my decision based on the reviews on Sonicstate because I trust you.
Well, that's very kind. I mean, I think, I don't know whether that was a question, as in why do I think that is, but I'll take it as such.
Yes.
I think maybe what I try and do when I review stuff, at least, is I just try and get into it, and if I can't get into something, I find it quite hard to review. And then it's just a sort of, it does this, it does that. So as long as I can find something cool it does, then it helps me show some enthusiasm and also, highlight certain things that perhaps aren't at the top of the feature list, but that are good to use. And I suppose what I try and do is, what's it like for people who might want to use it rather than just want to read the spec, I suppose. I mean, I haven't really analyzed it too much, but I try and get into something. It's the same with music, isn't it? You're working on a track. If you're not feeling it, you're not feeling it, and it's the same for equipment. I try and feel it somehow in some way.
No, you're absolutely right. And your videos have, what I like about them is they are the right sort of balance between that. Your approach is not condescending. I think when you speak, because you do know a lot of the lingo and the GeeK Talk, it just comes out, but your presentation style is very easy and, you're not condescending. And in a world of sort of rising narcissism, YouTube channels and Instagram, it's a breath of fresh air to see someone who can present things in a way. Your channel is not about you, and that's what I love about it. Is your passion shines through, and it's all about the content. And the irony of that is when you don't talk about yourself, that is when people become interested in you, and that is why I'd like to, and that's why I'd like to sort of start this conversation off with a little bit about you. I want to know, who is Nick Batt, and say as much or as little as you want to, but let's just sort of start off with the obvious. where are you from, and how did you get into this? What made you take the path you're on at the moment?
Well, most people, it's a kind of series of happy accidents and kind of instinctive, just roots, I suppose. I mean, I was thinking about this before because I thought that this question might come up. And I suppose, I mean, like many people, I'm of a certain age where technology made music creation and music making at home a lot harder than it is now. So, it started off with tape to tape. So, a twin cassette deck where I'd record something on one thing and something else on another. And I rented a synthesizer and I had a kind of rubbishy old acoustic guitar. And I just started experimenting and trying to make some sort of music or whatever. I don't know whether I can't remember whether it was the technology or I can do this, what can I do with it, or whether I don't think I had a kind of a musical uh um instinct waiting to burst out or anything like that. So that's where it started. I mean, that's back last century, like many people of my age. And I think it's the same. It's the same story for a lot of people. It just depends at what point in the technological kind of changes you jump on. Because you're very rarely in a position where you buy the right piece of equipment first time, or B, you can afford the piece of equipment that you want. So you figure out how to do things in a way. And I suppose that's my inquisitive nature, because I apply that to lots of things, whether it be coding stuff for Sonic or for workflow things, or designing how the studio can work a bit more efficiently, or I can get a bit more out of it. All of that. I suppose an inquisitive mind is what started me off.
I see. Now, well, that's you've answered it very, very well there. It is that combination between inquisitiveness and then passion, and I think we reached a point, especially in music production, where or even in all forms of music, really these days, it's almost like where you almost cannot be a producer without being quite technically minded. You really need to apply yourself to the technology if you are to have some form of success. Do you agree?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think we're overlooking one thing, which is, there are people who have just got musical juice flowing out of them, and they can't help but make good stuff. I mean, and whether or not they're technical is not necessarily part of it. They just might have there's a little girl up the road from me, in lockdown in the UK. We were all out in our gardens, and I used to hear her singing, and she would just sort of like riff, come up with something that she wanted, like for tea, like sausages or whatever, and she would sing. And it was just, I was kind of transfixed, because she's really musical and she comes up with these brilliant riffs, and she understands how to make her voice sound different. She's got, and she's only like, I don't know, 8 or 10 or something, I think. So I suspect she will have a great musical journey if she follows it, because she's instinctively got this thing. Technology can help, but I think for lots of people, technology becomes the interest. The music can be secondary, but there's the other part of music and music technology is when you play something to yourself or with another person in a room, something special happens. And that, those endorphins, whatever it is that gets released, that's a really addictive sensation as well. And I think that's important, equally so.
No, you're absolutely right. I think it's that combination between, being an artist and, being a little bit of a scientist, so to speak. And, we kind of find ourselves in that middle, on that line. And I think a lot of people, everyone's different, but I think people are fundamentally leaning more to a musical side or more to a technical side. And I think a lot of people looking at you would just naturally assume you're a real sort of kind of tech head. But obviously, you've had the success with DNA, which we're going to talk about later. But let's talk about the sort of formative years. Did you ever study music, or was it just an interest you picked up?
Well, when I was a kid, I had piano lessons for a couple of years. There was a really friend of mine's mother. They lived around the corner from us. She was a really interesting woman. She was Mexican concert pianist sort of grade. She had a grand piano in her hand, but she also had this really interesting history. She was also had been in the circus as an acrobat, and she was really unique. And she taught me the basics. But while I was there, I remember hearing some other music. She was really into Jean-Michel Jarre, and I used to hear that there. And I suppose that the sounds that those things, maybe very, very, that's really, really early. I don't think I was kind of aspiring to that at the time. But then I think I just got interested in pop music, like loads of kids. You know, I grew up in the punk era, and that was very much pop music, even though it was, you know, supposed to be alternative. It was still in the pop charts. It was popular, and you know, 3-minute or less tunes were kind of the. So that's very much my grounding. You know, that this sort of notion of pop music, and I suppose maybe the first couple of things, which is probably quite apt because I think I came across you in the group which is focused on Depeche Mode.
Yes.
I'm not a Depeche Mode sort of nut, but I just remember I think it was New Life was probably the first thing that I heard that made me go, oh, what are synthesizers?
Okay. Okay. So Depeche Mode was both of our sort of introductions into the music world. And I mean, Nick, I've got a little bit of a dirty secret here. And it's kind of like, I think if the community knew that I'm probably not as big a Depeche Mode fan as what they think I am. I mean, of course I am, but you know, the deeper I go into this channel, I can realize when I meet some people, I'm like, these people are like, whoa, man, I'm a fan, but I'm just not quite on that level.
I'm definitely not that. I mean, I think it was that, and then I didn't really do anything until what was the album? Songs of Faith and Devotion was my favorite Depeche Mode album.
One of
Flood, you know, and he's a genius.
One of mine too, absolutely. Well, Nick, what was your first? Well, we will obviously let's go down a little bit of a geeky talk here. What was your very first synthesizer, or what was your first instrument? Did you have like an acoustic guitar and then switch over to a synthesizer? What was it?
I think I probably did have an acoustic guitar. My mum had like a rubbishy old acoustic guitar, nylon string, and I used to twang on that. We also had a piano, so I used to play on that a little bit. My first synth was actually one I rented from a local music store, and I think it was a Korg Micro Preset. And again, you know, the thing is what you heard on records and what you actually got when you had a synthesizer in your hands at that time were very, very different things. So I remember feeling it was perhaps not the right instrument to start with, but it's what I had, and I used to play with that in a band, and I think that's what also got me started. I started jamming with some people, and we started a little band, and that feeling of that greater, you know, the greater sensation, the greater musical experience that you're having because something happens when you're in a room playing with people, even though it was rubbish like most people when they first started out. And then my first purchased synthesizer was a Korg MS-20.
Okay.
No, sorry, but I beg your pardon, MS-10.
MS-10.
Which again was really not what I was hoping for, I think.
Yeah, well, you know, it's funny you should say that. And, you know, I also coach younger up and coming producers and stuff. And of course, I have my gurus and stuff that I look up to. But Nick, I find sort of, obviously you started this before I did, but something that, you know, you and my generation have in common is we know the time, and especially more you, I don't mean this to make you sound older, but you know how when you started out, how difficult it was to actually, you know, a lot of the fight was just to get a good sound. Fast forward to today, you know, the amount of technology that is available, it's almost ridiculous. And a lot of, I find the younger guys, and girls, they almost don't sort of seem to appreciate the technology because, you know, you can turn on a home keyboard, you know, and there's great sounds. So very often when they just do something, I've got to say to them, do you know how difficult that was to do 25 years ago?
Yeah, well, I think there's different challenges now because, I mean, yes, it was harder. I think back then it was more about creating a sensation and a vibe and a feeling. For me, I just remember sort of thinking if I could string two sections together, have a bass line and a guitar or something that felt nice, then that was an achievement. I mean, I think nowadays those challenges still remain. What's harder is because the sounds that you have are already kind of release ready in many cases, then it highlights maybe the deficiencies you have in other areas, which maybe you can't sing very well, or maybe you can't arrange very well, or maybe your drum programming sucks, or maybe there are other areas that you have to kind of excel in more. Whereas when you're relying on something that you've created from scratch, that's a bit more Heath Robinson, people will just understand your sound world that you've created. As long as it kind of is convincing in some way, that was fine. And it's the same now, but it's harder to be convincing because so many people sound so good. So you've got to be a little bit better, I think.
Yeah, I think that is the thing is, as I say, you know, you start off with an analog synthesizer, and you've got to build everything from scratch. Fast forward, you know, and this is something I could never understand when I was younger. You know, I couldn't understand why someone would buy a Moog synthesizer. It's monophonic, you know, and I'd be like, what? It can only play one note at a time. My Roland workstation can play, you know, tens of thousands of sounds. But it's funny if we see how music tech, you know, we started off in the sort of analog days, and then we went through this, you know, with the DX7, the D50, and the M1, those digital synths. Fast forward to today, it's really gone full circle, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I suppose the thing is with software where the number of parameters are so legion, you can make so much out of, you know, something like Spectrasonics, or, you know, pick any massive soft synth, you know, massive, for instance, you know, you can go so far behind the front panel. There's an enormous complexity to it. And I think also for us, we were, well, you know, those things I was prepared to put up with because it was all new and it was the only way to do it. Whereas now I sort of can't be bothered to spend that much time so much. I mean, sometimes I might review a synth where I feel like the effort you have to put into it to get something useful out of it, you know, so they, well, I could probably have a quicker route to where I want to get using another instrument. And I suppose that those are, again, these are the sort of things, the UI and the UX. But then, you know, kids who've grown up with not knowing anything else are going to be way fluent on it. But I imagine as they get older, they're probably not going to be so interested in massive menu diving and, you know, the sort of stuff, because that time becomes then a commodity that you don't have so much of as your life gets more complicated.
Yeah, and also, I mean, as I say before, it used to be. It's like with information. Before, information was hard to find, and you had to try and find information. I say to the guys, you know, the amount of information we get these days for free on YouTube is information I would have paid a lot for, you know, 20 years ago. Okay, not all the information, but a lot of it is very good. So I think the challenge these days as a producer is, and I always trying to teach the guys I'm coaching, is you really need to limit yourself when you're making a record and just say, okay, I'm going to use this, this, and that. As we did, you know, in the 80s and the 90s, we only had this, this, and that.
Yeah, I mean, I think limitations always mean that you've got probably you waste less time on stuff you don't need. I would agree, but there's also, I think it's important to immerse yourself into these things and explore all the stuff you don't need to find out whether you're likely to need it again in the future, because you don't want to waste your time going down a rabbit hole when you know, oh, I've kind of done that already, when you're trying to essentially just come up with something that gives you pleasure. And the process is pleasure for a lot of people, and that's totally fine. But I think the important thing is that, you know, you just having a sense of what you want to do with it, because that only comes from putting the hours in, because you're going to go down all those cul-de-sacs, and putting the hours in is fine. And I think that's important. I think that's really important. So I don't think you should be efficient at all times, but it's like when you want to apply yourself, you want to use the stuff that you need to use rather than all the stuff you don't really need to use.
Correct. Also, I think this is not a product endorsement, but, you know, I think obviously the Waves company do some great plugins. And for instance, the other day I was chatting to a guy that I'm sort of mentoring. He's using this thing called the parallel particles, the Shapes parallel particles. And what that is you put it onto an insert, and by dialing in a certain amount of bite and attack and whatnot, you can give the sense of parallel compression.
Right.
And that to me, and there is a question in this, Nick, and it's kind of like, I mean, I've got that plugin. I think it, you know, to my ears, it sounds amazing. You put it onto an insert, and you do get the parallel compression sound. However, now I use parallel compression. I'm sure a lot of us do. I understand it, but now to this younger guy, because he can just add this plugin to the insert bus and get instant results, he's got no idea what parallel compression is. So, you know, there's this kind of thing where
maybe he's not looking for a career in telling people how parallel compression works. You know, maybe he just wants it to sound good. You know, and that's fine.
Yes.
I mean, you know, we all know that when we start out, and probably still many of us do, you know, if it's not working, quite often you just add more stuff.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily always the way to go. You just feel like if this bass isn't really bassy enough, then if I add more stuff to the bass, then maybe what you should do is thin out the, the stuff around it so the bass has room to move. These are only things that you're going to learn, and some of that is instinctive because some people can translate what they hear and what they're trying to emulate into what they want. And I think the thing about music and art generally is most of the innovation comes from people who are, yes, that you get true innovation, which is something completely new, which is ultimately quite a rare commodity. But it's from people who go, I want to sound like that, don't know how to do it, and figure out a way that they think sounds like that, but doesn't really, but still has something about it, which moves the whole thing forward a little bit. Because someone else goes, oh yeah, that's interesting because it's got essence of what I was trying to achieve, but it's also got a lot of what I'm doing in it, and I don't know quite how I did that. Because if I'd done it by the method, whatever that might be, then that would be the same, and we don't want the same, do
Yes.
we?
Yeah. I suppose I always talk about the end results, and you don't necessarily. I suppose it's a little bit like driving a car. You don't need to understand how mechanics work in order to drive the car, I suppose.
No, certainly not. I mean, obviously, it'll help you if you break down in the middle of the night and there's a life or death situation. But that's rare in music production. But
Yeah.
yes.
I want to just sort of get onto your gear and stuff, but just sort of to finish this chapter, coming back to how limited our technology was. I remember watching a documentary on OMD a few years back, and Andy McCluskey was sitting in his studio. He had all the tapes from Enola Gay and Electricity. And what's fascinating is when he actually plays back the solo parts of songs like Electricity and Enola Gay, and just to hear how primitive those instruments were. And and I always use that as a case study for people, is like, those records sound timeless and amazing despite the fact that they had no gear.
I think that's really interesting because I've done, have worked in various studio situations where you get to hear the multi-track of certain songs. And I'm always really surprised. I don't remember it sounded like that. It's not that in isolation, that doesn't sound anything like I imagined it would.
Yes.
And quite often it's the combination of things, obviously, that creates the magic, in the same way that a room full of people playing together or singing together can create a magic thing that not one person can do, obviously. But things like how much reverb there was on the drums in 1970s records, or whatever, you just thought everything was dry as a bone. It's like, really? That's incredibly roomy. How come I didn't notice that? And I think that's so endlessly fascinating. I think that when you break things down like that, but the simplicity, it comes down to the feeling. Because I'd imagine, they didn't build it up bit by bit. They probably got a certain amount of it happening to get that vibe, and then recorded the individual parts. And whoever was producing or recording might have tinkered with that a little bit to make it more or less of the direction it would, recognize the essence of itself, or at least you'd hope so. But so it's an interesting
Yeah. Go on. And I think this is a sort of a real sort of schoolboy or a novice mistake. I think when we first learn to make records, I see this with people who are starting out. You mix in isolation, you make every sound really great, and when you put it together, it's a mess. And people, as we've spoken in the case of Enola Gay, and there are many others, is when you take the sounds, in isolation, they sound rubbish. But it's listening to it as a mix, as a whole, which is important.
I think what's really interesting also, this has only really sort of come to me, is the fact that a lot of the modern technology now, like ducking, like EQ masking, like dynamic EQ, they're designed to take the stuff away, to make room for this rather than have it sit in the right place in the first place. And that's so it's almost like kind of mixing of almost unmixable signals mixable, which is an interesting thought. So some of that technology, anyway, not all of it.
Right, Nick, let's come on to a part where all the geeks are going to be salivating now, and that is what is in Nick Batt's setup. Run through some of your hardware synths and some of your go-to synths.
Oh, wow. That's really hard because it's always changing. There's always stuff. It's very transient. I mean, my personal setup it's sort of something that doesn't really exist anymore because all the space here is used for sort of, okay, I've got a table beside me. There's nothing on it at the moment because it's over there because I've got the Korg Op 6 that I'm just starting to look at. I've also got Yeah, well, but let's take it from my live, when I was playing live, which was a long time ago now. It's not like that COVID has stopped me from performing, because I haven't done for a couple of years. I was using a sub 37 mini log, Dreadbox Erebus Mark II, and sometimes a Dominion 1. But what I find now is I kind of tend to gravitate towards synths that just have a certain something about them, and I like a bit of hands-on, obviously, because I don't want to be spending. I want to get quickly to the music. I don't want to have an IT session where I can help. I really like. I haven't got one, but I really like the Minilog XD. I think that is a great synth, and I would like to get one, but I've got a Minilog, so it feels like a bit of an.
Is that this one? I've got that as well. Can you see that?
That's just the Minilog,
That's
isn't
the
it?
normal MIDI log, yeah.
Yeah, the XD is the one with the digital oscillator that you can,
Yeah.
yeah, and great effects. I like that one. I really like the Dread, and I've got Dreadbox stuff. The Typhon, something that I reach for a lot, because again, it's got the effects built in, and it's got a certain something. But there are some that I've just been putting. I'm trying out the Blue Box, 1010 Music Blue Box at the moment, and I picked up the we've got a Pittsburgh Modular SV1, which is a really simple 2 oscillator synth voice. And the oscillators just sound fantastic. I find myself really appreciating the sound of good oscillators, because you just kind of go, wow, there's so much there to begin with. They're really, and I suppose that's the same vibe that people get from Minimoog, but I never really appreciated that at the time. And I haven't got a Minimoog, so, I wouldn't know too much. And the time I would have probably used one, it would have dwarfed everything else in my setup. So there wasn't room for any of my other stuff to fit in, because, back then I was using crappy gear, and I had to make it fill the space. So putting something that would just kind of cover everything up didn't make any sense. I like the Hydrasynth. I've got a Hydrasynth. I think what else? Yeah, I mean, but there isn't really a setup, because it's ever changing, and a lot of this stuff is not mine. It goes back, it stays for a while, and then people go, oh yeah, can you send that back or whatever. Sometimes I get to hang on to things, sometimes I don't. But that's not why I do it. I mean, it's not like I need more synths or require more synths or want more synths.
No, I think this is something that really shines through, and why you and your channel really resonated with me, Nick, is because I can tell, despite the fact that you really know your geek, you can speak all the geeky lingo and stuff, your passion and your enthusiasm shines through, and I think that is why Sonicstate has been very successful, I think.
Well, I hope so. I mean, it's not always easy to maintain a level of enthusiasm when you're reviewing the same variant of a monophonic subtractive synthesizer, for instance. Often you just get one after the other, and you just sort of feel like, well, there's not very many places for me to go with this, in terms of making some sort of special discovery, because if it's a basic voice, then, so I try to. I mean, I must get a bit weary sometimes, but I try not to. I try not to let it show. I mean, at the moment, obviously, things are quite difficult. There's lots of isolation, so I find it quite hard to keep the energy levels up. Just because I get no real physical interaction with people. We're not getting those things that kind of help top you up. I mean, it's fine doing remote stuff, but it's not the same as being, in person with people.
No, so where are you based, Nick?
I'm based in Bath.
Bath. Okay, that's lovely out there. How long have you lived there? Have you always were you born there?
Yeah, I wasn't born here. I was born in Bristol. Then my parents moved to Cardiff when I was a kid, and then we moved back to Bath when I was probably 5. So I've been here a long time. Yeah, I mean, it's just where I've ended up. And Bath in my formative years was a very sort of quite a vibrant musical city. There was lots of stuff going on here. So, and there still is a certain amount of it, in the way that musical genres tend to move around, Manchester scene, the Bristol scene, we were sort of bolted onto the Bristol scene, but there was also the kind of the Tears for Fears scene, I suppose, because there's quite a lot of activity around that, and a lot of bands that came out of that whole, area, which, before I was making music professionally, but it was an influence.
Well, this brings us nicely onto Sonicstate now. So how many years has been Sonic? It's over 10 years, isn't it?
Well, we started in 1996.
Oh wow, okay.
Or maybe 94. I can't remember. It says on the site.
Wait, okay, so you started. Forgive my ignorance. Forgive not my ignorance, but you started before. This was like, well, when did, yeah, that was kind of like before the internet.
1995. Beg your pardon?
Okay. So how did you start off? You said it was like an audio, like a like a pod. Well, it wasn't a
No, no,
podcast.
no, no. This is the website. YouTube channel came along much later on.
Yeah, of
So
course.
website started. It was a bunch of people. A bunch of friends who were all involved in music in some way, and we decided we would have a go at publishing a website. So it was very much written content. You know, we all had these ideas, and you know, we were doing this thing called like fantasy football. There's a thing called Fantasy A&R where we were gonna you could pick bands, and you know, you'd get points based on how high they charted and all that
All
sort of
right.
thing. Uh, as those sort of things fell by the wayside, as they required too much ongoing maintenance, that's how it started. It was all very much written. We didn't start doing video till probably 2000, so 5, 6 years later, we started to do video, and that was filming people at NAMM. We didn't start doing our own video until, gosh, I don't know, 2005, 2006,
Yeah.
where suddenly I just thought, well, look, point a camera at me, I'll talk about this.
Yeah.
And we did. And I think my first review was I'm wearing an orange hoodie, and it was the M Audio Oxygen 8 was my first
Okay.
review.
Wow.
And I've upped my energy and enthusiasm levels since then. I look a bit annoyed in that video, but it's got a ton of views because it's been there the longest.
Well, this is, I just want to sort of get into, you know, the Nick Batt sort of workflow. And with Sonicstate now, is it, you know, I think this is a difficult thing is when you're reviewing a product, you know, you've got to be honest, because if you're not honest, you know, you don't want to be that guy that just says everything's great just so you can get free gear. You know, there's that line between you want to be honest, but you want to be sort of diplomatic. So how do you walk that line when you're reviewing something that's not doing it for you? How do you kind of,
Well,
you know?
yeah, I mean, sometimes I just can't find a way in and I have to spend a bit more time on it. But sometimes there's just a load of stuff that doesn't work properly or should work better. And I usually try and assess that to begin with. And if it's really kind of just there are some real fatal flaws in this thing, I'll go back to the manufacturer and say, is it supposed to be like this? What are the issues? Are you fixing it? You know, is it ready for me to review? I mean, I will very occasionally just say I'm not going to review it because all I've got is bad stuff to say. And I don't get any joy out of just trashing, you know, something. There's no fun in that. I mean, I suppose if maybe I was a different personality type, I might enjoy that. You know, the old school kind of NME music journalist kind of approach where you're just really, really kind of quite funny, but also quite rude. You know, I suppose there's a market for that, and I'm sure there are people that do that. It's just not part of what I do. But generally speaking, I assess it first. Sometimes I get a sense, yes, I think I'll be able to find some good stuff in this. So I'll say, yeah, I'll review it. Sometimes I think, I don't think this is going to be for me. And also sometimes you just think, I don't want to have to figure out how a Kronos workstation works. You know, that's just too long. There's not enough time for me to be able to get to the bottom of that. That's the tricky, you know, so there are all sorts of factors that go in. But yeah, sometimes I'll just say, I'm going to say this is bad. Is this how bad it should be? You know, it might just be a couple of things, and then sometimes if it's really bad, I'll just say I don't want to do it. It's not going to do you any favors, and I'm not going to enjoy it. So let's not review it.
Yeah, I mean, on the subject, you know, we don't want to go down a sort of workstation rabbit hole now. But I remember when I used to work in Turnkey. Remember in Soho Soundhouse, I was a salesman, and then I was the buyer, one of the buyers. And I remember when I started there in 1999, I became known as the keyboards guy because I used to, you know, I was like really geek out of the keyboards. And I know workstations were a really big thing sort of in the 90s and stuff. And you know, Nick, I'm quite surprised to see that market is still as big as it is. I mean, if I look at the latest Korgs, Rolands, and Yamahas, they've just released their latest ones. They are very, very expensive. And, you know, I haven't actually seen any of them in person or in reality.
Sure.
The reviews are amazing. And I think what they do is just amazing. But I just think, you know, for £3,000, you can, I just think the workstation thing is, I don't want to say expired, but I'm just, you know, the way we work these days. How do you feel?
I think I understand why you might think that, but you got to remember, and I suppose this is less relevant now. It feels less relevant, but I don't think everybody else is caught up because musical directors, people who perform live, who want to maybe do either covers where they need the whole band in the box kind of thing, or the whole track, church stuff where it's just, you know, there are these huge markets where people will use songwriters. Lots of traditional songwriters just want to be able to go bang, 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 bang. Here's an idea. You know, maybe they're that's all they do. They're not all looking for full demos. They just want to get the stuff down. I mean, there are lots of people who find out, and you know, the motif, the mocks, you know, they sound good. You know, the big Roland ones, they put some extra love into whatever it is, the D to A's, the A to D's. I mean, the thing where I find it's complicated is it's almost like, how much time do you want to invest in that very specific workflow?
Yeah.
When you've got that workflow down, is it going to be able to get you your idea? Because ultimately you want to just be able to put your ideas down as fast as possible and do it fluently. And I suppose the thought of a workstation for many people just go, well, I just need to learn that and that's it. You know, and then if they're on that, then, you know, maybe the next Yamaha or the next Phantom or whatever will come out and it'll have more capabilities, and they might just upgrade and the workflow will be largely familiar to them. So that kind of makes sense, rather than all these disparate pieces of equipment and then figuring out how they work, and then why is my sound cut? You know, I do get it, but it doesn't feel, you know, obvious choice to some people, and I kind of get it. They don't really work for me. I did a something with the, I can't remember what it was, not the montage, but the MoDX.
Oh yeah.
Motif. I can't remember, and I just did a few musical sketches with it, and it was really, once I got past that, oh, this is so frustrating, I can't figure it out. Once I got it working, it was like, oh wow, there we go. And it was actually very quite rewarding, you know, and a lovely piano sound in it. You know, all that stuff is harder to get, and it means you're not, I suppose, if you don't want to be sitting in front of a computer as well. There's some people who just don't want to do that, but then, you know, essentially that, you know, a screen that big and you're sitting in front of it, then, you know, there's a similarity. It's just not the same thing as, you know, maybe your day job. So that's why you might want to choose it.
Well, it's funny. We talk about how technology has progressed. I remember in 1997, I released my first album, and I produced, well, I say produced, I put it together using a JV880, a Kawai K4, a Roland U20, a Roland E16, and I sequenced it on a Roland MC50 Mark II. And of course, when I show the younger guys, you know, you make a record with something with a display that size. However, coming back to the workstations and that workflow it does mean that you had no choice, but you actually listened. I find a lot of people these days, they're not listening. Well, they obviously they're listening, but they tend to they're using their eyes as much, and that's often a hindrance, don't you think?
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, I think, you know, there are studies that have been made, aren't there, with, you know, depending on the color of the instrument and whatnot. It's really, it's interesting. There's a thing recently with the Cobalt 8, which is the modal thing, which is a beautiful looking thing. The color is so gorgeous, and the way the light hits it, it photographs really well. Sounds really good too. But I get a sense there's a certain element of the attractive person syndrome, you know, where it's like, because they're so pretty, somehow they're more fascinating in some way, you know. And I'm not saying it's bad, and I think it's actually, I prefer it to the Cobalt 8, but I wonder how much cosmetics or the visual approach to it works. Because whereas I look at something like, you know, the Yamaha stuff, while good, I mean, it's not something you could ever say was beautiful. Their industrial design is not geared around desirability for aesthetic. Which I was hearing a story. There was a chat between Jean-Michel Jarre and I can't remember who it is. Who's the superstar Richie DJ? They had sushi somewhere, and he was saying that this kind of weird flip around that a lot of the Swedish manufacturers, you know, Electron, Pocket, Teenage Engineering, and others are going for this much more aesthetic approach, which is traditionally very Japanese. You know, the beauty of design, this kind of intrinsic, whereas the Japanese designers are going for functionality over beauty, and it's sort of weird the way that things have flipped around culturally, but for different purposes.
I see, absolutely. Now, on the Sonicstate, let's talk about Sonicstate and the videos and stuff, and how lockdown, how has that affected you and your workflow? You know, what does your typical workday or week look like?
Well, I've just come to the studio, you know. I've come to the studio. I've tried to be more productive. It's been different. I've had a quite a productive period sort of this last 3 or 4 months. The first bit was very hard because, like many people, you know, I just I freaked out right at the beginning of this because I just didn't know whether, you know, we were going to be eating rats and, you know, drinking pond water. I just had no concept as to what society would make of this. You know, it was, and I think a lot of men in particular had this kind of weird, almost primal survival kind of thing, and
Yes.
it made them really freak out, and they started kind of, you know, boarding up the windows or the equivalent. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Whereas
yeah.
a lot of the women were much more pragmatic and kind of, it'll be all right, you know.
Mm,
And the truth was obviously somewhere in between.
mm.
So I was really not very productive, and I found it quite hard. Although I did come to work and I tried to carry on doing my thing, I just wasn't. I didn't. I found it quite difficult. And now I've been through a period of productivity. I've been reviewing quite a lot of things. I'm trying to get the video out there, and I'm feeling more productive, but I'm feeling just sort of a bit tired, a bit worn out.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's been an ever changing thing. But I mean, ultimately, it hasn't changed my day to day life because I come into the office, I'm on my own. Andy, my business partner, he's been working from home. So, you know, he comes in once in a while, but mostly I'm here on my own. And we did the Super Booth Home Edition where we did lots and lots of remote views. We do remote interviews. We're doing a lot of that stuff. So it's changed in that sense. You know, we rely more on the remote technology than we rely on the coming to the office and or coming to the studio and shooting something.
Correct. And of course, you would, I don't have to ask you this question, but I assume you would go to the Synthfest every single year.
I'll go to Synthfest, yeah. I would have gone, obviously, this year because it's, I mean, in terms of shows that we do, it's a piece of cake. You know, we just drive up the road and come home. You know, it's not like having to go to Los Angeles or Berlin and all the logistical issues because we're taking a team. I mean, all of that's gone, and that's worrying because, you know, it does make money for us. And so without NAM, which is going to be in January, or certainly not NAM as we know it, I'm not exactly sure how it's going to be. It's been quite difficult. But the flip side has been, purely from a business point of view, people, because there's no shows and lots of shops haven't been open, people can't get their hands on things. There's been there's been an inward focus to the online stuff. So we've benefited to that from a degree. You know, marketing budgets have come back and have gone into people like us and YouTubers and whatnot. So from a business point of view, it's been okay. You know,
Yes.
we haven't kind of, we're not about to go under or anything. But, and I think because what COVID also does is make people focus on the things that make them happy, which would be their hobbies, making
Yes.
music, whatever. And if they're furloughed or they're off work, or whatever it may be, depending on where you are, they might have a bit more money to spend because they're not going out. So they go, you know what, I'm going to buy that synth. So the whole sector of music creation has been very buoyant this year, and it's accelerated the chain. The pace of acceleration for change is just really rapid, and I think we're going to see a completely new world very quickly in how things are done.
You are right. And obviously there's, you know, this has been a very difficult year, but I think myself and some people have, and like much like you as well, Nick, despite the fact that we've all kind of suffered in some way, we've managed to sort of harness the positive side of this. I think the way we communicate and now has changed. I think Zoom is, I was talking to a friend yesterday about Zoom, and I thought, you know, Skype must be kicking themselves because, you know, Skype started this whole thing. And I mean, Zoom have just, I think Skype kind of fell behind.
Yeah, well, I think obviously they were acquired by Microsoft, which means that they have their corporate agenda as part of it. Microsoft probably aren't too worried about their bottom line.
Yeah.
Probably market share if we're into that sort of stuff. But Zoom has made things very useful. I mean, to be honest, we use Zoom for more than ever is screen sharing because you get a very good high resolution screen share
Yeah.
from it. But audio and stuff, it's not very good, I don't think.
Yes. Yes, you're right.
So we use other systems. So the system that we use is we can bring in webcams. We don't use Zoom. So if I was doing a remote interview, say for instance, I did one with Bitwig, I've got a webcam, which is him coming in via our system. I've got Zoom, which I capture and comes into our system, and then they record their screen. So I can get a multi-camera shoot from somebody who's not here. You know,
Yeah.
it's not, and we've figured out all of this stuff. I mean, just going through the Super Booth experience, normally we rock up at a booth, go, okay, where do I plug in? Where are you? What are we looking at? Okay, go. 20 minutes. A complex multi-camera Zoom remote shoot is probably an hour plus of sound check, tech setup, and then the shoot itself. I mean, and then the edit. It's an it's a much more time consuming process.
Anyway, Nick, this is a really, I'm known on my channel for making these ridiculously cheesy jokes, like those "thank you very much, we'll be here all week" type thing. And when you were saying Zoom hasn't, you noticed that Zoom hasn't got the great audio. I don't think most people would notice that. I think it's more because you're a sound guy. And then I thought to myself, yeah, you've got the hearing of a bat. And I thought,
it's been said.
It's been said. So.
I'll take that. Well, the Zoom is fine for speech, and you can get good stereo audio, but there's all this weird gain ducking and which makes it very hard. But there are other technologies that you can use. It's just it starts to get more complicated, and we've as I said, part of what I do is I like to figure out how to do things. Before I found this we use something called vMix, which is very useful for bringing lots of video sources together, but before that, it was an incredibly complicated setup of all sorts of machines with Skype on, and it was just insanely complicated.
Right, Nick. Let's move on to you as an artist now. DNA, your project with Neil Slateford. You still working with Neil on that?
No, Neil runs. In fact, just sold a very successful adult goods business, shall we say.
Okay.
He's also based in Bath. But yeah, we worked together for years. I mean, when we started off, I mean, Neil used to be a record company rep and a DJ. That's and he DJ'd in the club that I used to go to and also work at as a sound engineer for mixing bands live. And we got together sort of through that. And so we worked together for quite some time, and we did probably, what was it? It was probably 89 through 92. And then we started working together again in about 1990 something or other, where we got a call from a Warner Brothers. I think it was Interscope or Warner Brothers just said, "Oh, you're DNA, right? I finally found you. You still remix?" And I was, yeah, of course we are, I said. And they said, "Right, do you want to have a go at this?" And it was Lorena McKennitt, Mama's Dance. And because we had other interests by then, we weren't that as bothered, and it was quite nice to have a relaxed, but we just go, "Oh, it's not working today. We'll see you tomorrow. Let's see how we get on." And it was good. And it was also at the end, we did evenings and weekends. That's all we could really do. But by some miraculous, stroke of luck, that first thing that we did, just as a sort of let's see how it goes, went to #1 in the US, our mix, and we completely transformed her artistic, as she was perceived, and the success of her records or whatever. And that was kind of, we just thought, "Oh, I still got it then." And it was really kind of, it was great. And then we did more mixes and some other stuff. And then that finished probably around 2001, 2002. We just kind of, that's that. These things comes in cycles and waves. And that was probably the last time that our talents, perhaps, or our brand as artists were valued, whereas now music creation and music stuff is less valued. I mean, if I was to be asked to do a remix now, I very much doubt I would get paid anything like what we could get back in those days, because we had a name. But that's not, that's not why I'm not doing it. It's just, and I've worked with other people, and it was just the art that us as an act is not a thing anymore, I would say.
Well, you've raised an interesting point then, Nick, how you said how you worked with this artist, and then because of your remix, it went to #1, and it really, knocked her into the, she became well known. And that's really, I was a recent interview I had with Gareth Jones. He's a very modest guy. I've seen you've interviewed him before, obviously. Yeah, and we're talking about the Depeche Mode thing, and he always goes, because he did that Berlin trilogy, and he just goes, "Oh no, it's all about the band and their music." And I'm saying, no. The production is just as important. And I think you've just highlighted that in your example there, that, your production with this artist, had she worked with someone else, she may have not necessarily have, gotten so well known. So the production is.
To be fair, she was hugely well known anyway, but not in sort of mainstream, it was.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
So it wasn't like we plucked her out of obscurity. I mean,
Sure.
But yeah, but that anyway, that generated a whole bunch of other work, which was, some of it was good, some of it was fun, but it was more fun because we didn't really need to do it. It wasn't
Mm.
like our only thing. And that made it a lot easier because I kind of got burnt out the first time round on the remix cycle. We were working all the time. I mean, in the end, I just sort of figured out how to say no and started to focus on maybe some friends and seeing people and stuff, because it's so easy just to sit there and I took time, it took me time to do things, and that's, but yeah, it was a fun, it's a fun, I'm glad it happened. And obviously the whole first time round was another story, but yeah, I mean, we've, we still keep in touch, but we don't work together musically. I mean, I technically left DNA and it's his, so I'm not in it. Or I mean, I guess if we work together, then it would be under the name, but it's his name. He's the owner of that name now. So
I see. And so, are you putting out anything at the moment? Any aliases you go by?
no, I haven't. I don't really have time, and also I think the thing is, I spent such a long time in the studio working on records, either with DNA or later with Goldfrapp, where it's very detailed and very long, a long-winded way of working. I mean, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. It's just for me, when I had a child and family commitments started to kick in, I didn't have time to spend
Yes.
hours in a studio tinkering with a hi-hat. It was just like, I just want to make some music now. Oh, that's nice.
Yes.
And then I
Mhm.
might go back and tweak it. So I get my kicks from putting musical examples in the reviews, and if people like them, then it makes me feel a bit better about myself. And I might release it on Bandcamp. We've got a Sonic Lab Bandcamp, and all the stuff that gets recorded as tracks there goes up. And I did an EP, I guess it was a couple of years ago now, and that did all right. It's nice, and it still sells occasionally. But I should do some more. But it's just it's time.
It's time, and I think it's the reward to effort ratio. And of course, we don't want to sound like money hungry bastards, but I think at the end of the day, there are a certain amount of hours in the day, and you've got to go, okay, I've got this amount of time. I have a family and everything. I'm going to spend this much time on this music. It's going to, it's going to bring me this much. Whereas if I focus more on the Sonic State reviews, the income's going to be greater.
Well, yeah. Well, hopefully that's not always the case, to be honest.
No.
But yeah, I suppose that's true. I mean, and I think you also creatively need to be in the right headspace to do
Yeah.
that. And I think, sometimes you just feel the urge, or sometimes when you're reviewing a synth, you come up with a riff and you go, I got to do something with that right now, and that occasionally happens. But there are so many other things, running Sonic State isn't just me, walking around the room playing synths and talking about them. There's so much else that has to happen. There are other contributors that need managing. There's the technical aspect. There's, someone has to sell advertising when people want to buy it. So, there's a lot of other stuff that goes on behind the scenes of running a business. We're a very small team, so I'm involved in a lot of that. So I don't have as much time as I just to swan about doing only the fun stuff.
Well, you're
Unfortunately.
right. You're right, Nick. I mean, I've been doing this YouTube thing for about 2 years now, and I've had a reasonably good it's been successful, um, beyond what I imagined. But I think you can relate to this probably more than anyone else. Is that people will watch your channel, they see the content, and they make their mind up, regarding the content. But what they don't see, as you say, it's the behind the scenes, it's the planning, the setting up, and all that stuff. And what they see is just a microcosm of what it is.
Yeah, well, obviously, like all YouTubers, you set it up so that it makes it, you don't want to have to, every time you want to make a video, you don't want to go into an empty room, set up all the cameras, put
Yeah.
you obviously have you want a repeatable system, which is what we've got here. When we first started making videos, it was all, ad hoc. And sometimes I look at that and I go, oh, that was an interesting shot. But the amount of extra time it takes, it's really hard, and you ultimately want to get the content out there. I mean, I don't often take very little time on a review. It takes time to do a review. Sometimes I might, it might happen quickly because it's a simple piece of equipment and it's fairly straightforward. But most of the time it takes a long time. And working with video is loads of data and there's tons of, we try and make it as simple as possible here so that, when we're switching video or recording cameras, it's easy to deal with, and it's a lot of effort goes into that workflow. But by the same token, as soon as you start, I mean, I'm noticing this more now because there are a lot more YouTubers out there. The competition thing is getting harder. I'm getting older, so sort of less immediately. My thumbnail is not immediately going to make maybe an 18-year-old kid go, oh, I want to listen to what that guy has to say because he looks like an old guy, you know. So, you know, there are all sorts of other things that go into it, and dynamic stresses and strains. So, you know, I mean, I suppose ultimately, you know, people like us end up putting pictures of kittens on synthesizers or good-looking young women, you know, to try and draw in the, you know, that's
Clickbait.
not us. Yeah, I really try not to do that. And then people always, our YouTube managers always saying, you know, you should really go for YouTube thumbnails that are this. And it's like, I don't want to be.
Yeah.
I don't want to be that. You know, I don't want to do that. I mean, you can only take so many fit pictures of a bald bloke with glasses, you know, making a stupid face. I don't want to. I don't want to.
You know what, Nick, and as I say, I'm really your audience, me, and this is why I'm so happy to do this interview today, because I know that a lot of the guys in my group, you know, I've got different segments to my channel, but I've got the GeeK Talk segment, and I know a lot of them will find this very interesting. And as I say, with this race for competition, a lot of videos you start them and it's someone going, hey guys, don't hit that, and there's that terrible in your face kind of thing. What I like about your channel, it's like, hi, I'm Nick Batt, I'm going to talk about this piece of gear. I'm not going to speak to you like you're an idiot. I'm not going to be condescending. And that's what I love about your channel, and that is why I take it, that is why every piece of gear that I've been interested in, I read Sound on Sound and Future Music, and it's your channel, and I make my decision based on those three sources.
Well, I mean, and that's great. I mean, that's much appreciated. I mean, I think there are so many other things to do other than reviews, I suppose. And one of the challenges that we also struggle with is coming up with formats that other people could do, because I can't do every single review of every single piece of equipment that exists. And so, you know, we've got other things like 5 minutes with, we've got 3 big questions, we've got, you know, we're trying to make people that can make other content. So like 5 minutes with, recently there was the Tisco 110F, which was done by Chris from Battery Operated Orchestra, and he did a great job and it sounded fantastic. So we're just trying, you know, I mean, the challenge is to do more. There'll be a point where me in front of a camera is actually going to be a negative rather than a positive. I would
Oh,
imagine.
come on, Nick, come on.
Well, because I'm gonna, you know, it's like my beat making days are kind of over. I'm not that guy who's going to be doing exciting kind of pop, interesting beats. You know, I used to, but now I'm a lot older. I probably don't have the same interests or energy to do that kind of thing. And I'm
Well, we look at one of my all-time favorites, Gary Newman. I mean, he's 62 this year, and he's like still like proper going for it. You know what I mean? So it's just what you're comfortable with, my friend.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, you know, I just think it feels right now that we're in a transitional phase. You know, there are lots of things shifting around because, as I say, everything's been accelerated. You know, the music stores are probably going to be a thing of the past, or most of them, because of the acceleration of loss of bricks and mortar. There's just tons of things. You know, live performances, while they will come back, they're going to be different because small venues won't be able to have social distancing or be safe enough to make it worth having 20 people in instead of 40. You know, there's all this stuff is going to change, and it's sad. I mean, I suppose it's inevitable. I mean, I think maybe after all of this is over, there'll be a huge surge of let's go out, let's see some music, and I do hope so. But maybe there'll also be a whole generation of people who weren't so comfortable with gigging, who found a voice to live stream their stuff instead, which is great.
Correct. Well, Nick, aren't you happy though? I always say this to sort of people of sort of like, you know, the generation before me, which is yours. And I just say, aren't you happy that you were born when you were? Because I'm quite envious of that generation, because you guys kind of were there when things were really new and exciting. You know what it was like to have success, to be able to sell records. Whereas I look at the, you know, the younger generation now, and of course, maybe I'm sounding old fashioned, you know, mankind will prevail, we'll find a way. But you are just, you know, that generation of where, you know, where you could sell things. And am I making sense?
There is, the simplicity of looking at a music chart, of which there was kind of one back then. There may have been subgenres, particularly in America, you know, you've got alt rock and whatever, you know, but the Billboard Top 100, the UK Top 40, the French Top 40, whatever, when you look at that and you see something that you've worked on creep up or down that chart, it was an immediate, it's like an affirmation. Most of us get into creativity because we've got deep psychological issues with peers, and we want them to love us and, you know, validate our work, all of that sort of stuff. I mean, I'm obviously being flippant there, but so to be able to see that instantly, bang, there it is, rather than gauge it somehow from the number of followers you might have on Instagram or whatever, which, while again is a good measure or feels like a measure of success and is a measure of success to a degree, that was per track you made. You could see those charts, and there are charts and obviously measurements, but it's a lot more fragmented, and so that means it's harder to get a sense maybe of, are you doing okay in your world? I suppose people who've been involved in more underground and electro stuff, which is not mainstream but has its own way of measurement, probably hasn't changed all that much. But for people who produce pop music, it really has, and those sort of sales and that is something that's missed, I think, a little bit. It's that simplicity. But by the same token, we've got YouTube. I can put a video on YouTube. I see the cheap, I'm like everybody else. I get a bit of an ego boost when I've got a great video that's going up, in numbers, and I see the numbers. I think, great, I did a good job. Or I see positive comments. It's a different sort of way of interaction. But yes, you're right. I mean, I was lucky to have a certain amount of that. But to be honest, the music industry back then was a pretty dodgy, corrupt, and not very. I mean, we say it's not as bad as it is now in some ways, because obviously with the streaming services, artists get very little for their work. But back then, you would get your radio plays, and you get, there was royalties. I mean, it's just somebody else decided how much money you get after what they decided to add on to your expense budget once they said, oh, we did this video and it cost this much. And it's like, wow, okay, so we're not going to get any money back. Artists have always been exploited. It's just now it feels like there's nobody. It's all a bit vague.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, and it's also like there's and I suppose the downside to it is as well, how you look at it. Anyone can self-release now, so there's just like this massive noise.
But that's good, because that means, someone like me who just goes, and I'll stick it up on Bandcamp. Unfortunately, I've got a promotional platform, which is Sonicstate. I can say, you can buy my tune here. I'll get some sales. But it's entirely possible for somebody to create their own little small business setup and make money. That you can do it, and that because you're getting 100%, or certainly, if you work with services like Bandcamp, they're not taking a massive commission. They're taking some, but the artist will get the lion's share of that, and that's really good. I mean, those are massive positives, I think.
Nick, I see we've just gone over an hour now, and I could feel I could just speak to you all day, and there's so much we can talk about. And I think with you're one of those people, you can open so many Pandora's boxes or cans of worms, if you want to see it. There's so many things we can talk about. Will you be prepared to speak to us again on another chat?
Yeah, of course.
Fantastic. Right, guys, I just want to say to you in the community, if you are part of the GeeK Talk community and you've not heard of Nick Batt, I'm here to say, where the hell have you been? I'm going to leave links to everything about Nick Batt in the description below. There's the Sonicstate YouTube channel. If you've not subscribed to it, make sure you subscribe to it now. Nick's the guy you listen to if you want a no bullshit, honest review on a piece of gear. He's my go-to guy. Also, Nick, you will provide me with your Bandcamp link.
Sure.
I'm sure the guys here would love to hear that, the Bandcamp link, and obviously we'll put links to DNA. Are there any other links you'd like us to?
Sonicstate.com. I mean, that's the website.
Sonicstate.com.
That's where a lot of our news, if you want news and kind of breaking stuff, that's where it'll be. And there's a whole bunch of stuff there, Sonicstate.com.
So there you go, guys. Links to all of that in the description below. And Nick, I'm sure we'll meet some point, probably at Super Booth or...
let's hope so.
Well, I'd love to shake your hand and buy, it's quite weird, this thing, because I'm a very sort of like, I don't want to say touchy-feely, but I'm one of those people I hug and I shake hands, and this thing where you can't even shake people's hands, I think it's been weird not shaking people's hands, you know what I mean?
Yeah, when you hear dramatizations and you're kind of constantly applying, I don't know, I listen to audio books, so I'm imagining this situation. I'm thinking, you can't do that, because in my head, you're not able to do that, but it's a book written 20 years ago or whatever. So you're applying today's restrictions, but hopefully we'll all come out of it and it'll all be great. Imagine the party, eh?
Can you imagine? I was, as I say, just on a closing note here, I was very flattered because I've got the Vaughn George Facebook group, and I've also got the Artist and Producers Forum. And then when, I think it was Simon Forsyth said to me the other day, do you know that Nick Batt's actually a member of the group? And I was like, No way. And so I was very honored to see you remember there. But Nick, thank you so much. This has been such a great chat. I've really enjoyed talking to you. I'm happy to see that you're prepared to speak to us in the future, time permitting, because I would love to speak to you about, you talked about Goldfrapp and many other. Can you just names drop on a few artists you've worked with?
Well, back in the day, there was lots of pop artists. We did a Erasure remix. We did there's a Kylie. We did, gosh, I'm trying to think who else.
Suzanne Vega.
And Vega, obviously.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, Goldfrapp, obviously. Lorena McKennitt. We did, trying to think what else. There was Candy Dulfer, Dave Stewart. I mean, this is all in the past, but Goldfrapp was probably my biggest single project since all that was over. I mean, I've worked with them for years.
So as you can see, guys, we're going to need a lot more time. Nick Batt, you the legend. Thank you so much, sir. I really appreciate your time. And this video will go up very shortly, but I will keep you updated. Thank you so much for your time, mate. And I look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you.
All the best, my friend.
Thank you, sir.
Take care, mate. Bye-bye.